As we see more and more panels, especially probability-based panels, eh, getting into place and being constructed, we also see a lot of variation in terms of how these probability-based panels recruit their panelists from the household, from their sample frame. These differences include their sampling techniques, sample frames such as ABS, RDT, their recruitment protocols, which contact and data collection modes they use, incentive amount, so on and so forth. But as we have discussed in various recruitment-related sessions as well as engagement-related sessions, one common recruitment and retention-related issue is recruiting and retaining reluctant, hard-to-reach, hard to retain, underrepresented segments of the population, such as conservatives, low education, low income, younger segments of the population, minorities, so on and so forth. So in this study, we specifically examined strategies aiming to create more accessible and equitable male contact materials for sampled households. So instead of doing oversampling, here we are using a different strategy by tweaking our materials, specifically mailing materials, to see if we can appeal more to these folks. So our goal is not just increasing the overall recruitment rate, but also bringing in these harder to recruit and retain panelists while we are monitoring the data quality and attrition retention, although I won't have time to go into the attrition and retention point, but I'll specifically talk about the yield rates, recruitment among these harder to reach and harder to retain panelists. So we have done three main interventions. The first intervention is the simplification of the content in the contact mailing. So we wanted to appeal to those specifically by simplifying these materials who do not have the ability or the time or the willingness to read all these materials we send in these packages. So if we simplify, rather than having a lot of different, so a letter, a brochure, and your cash, what if we just have one letter and much simplified letter? And in the simplified letters, we also provided taglines at each mailing. So each mailing provided a specific tagline that highlighted those things that sample members might really find appealing. So the second part of things is that we also wanted to keep our letter, but then we take away the brochure. So we had three groups: our regular letter with brochure, which is the control group, just with the regular letter without the brochure, and then the NIV design, our NIV letter, no brochure. So from more complex to less complex. So our aim was to bring in lower educated, lower income, but as well as those who just doesn't have the time or willingness to read through all these materials, such as higher income and those with children in their households. The second intervention, Casey, here, inclusion of QR codes, and this might provide some insights as well. As we know, and I'm not going to go much into detail since we already had some presentations on the QR code, but the premise of this is that after specifically the pandemic, QR codes have been more in our everyday lives. So it also provides an easier way to access the web survey for those with smartphones, because there's a switch between the contact and the data collection mode, which makes it burdensome. So that relieves, that eases that pain. And this might be more appealing to those who primarily use their smartphones for web access. So that was our biggest aim. So we were aiming to appeal to those who primarily rely on their smartphones for web access, low income and education segments. But Casey, you mentioned Hispanics and Spanish speakers as well. And our last intervention is including an additional data collection mode, which is paper and pencil contact mode. Historically, AmeriSpeak does not collect the recruitment data or questionnaire via PAPI. So in 2024, we introduced PAPI as a new contact mode. And our aim was to appeal to those who are not regular internet users and also or reluctant to provide personal information online, those who are rural and more conservative. Additionally, this also serves as a reminder contact. So that way people are able to see what your recruitment survey is all about and gives the ability to view the questionnaire without additional effort, potentially informs the panelists more about what the request is all about. So our study objectives, as I mentioned, improve overall yield rate, also as well as improve the yield rates of bringing in those harder to reach, harder to retain portions of the population. And we also looked into the measurement error data quality. For instance, when you introduce a QR code, you are pushing more people into taking these surveys via smartphones. So while we are trying to decrease that non-response error, are we increasing that measurement error because they have a smaller screen? Or by simplifying your materials that you send to the household, are you bringing in those folks with lower education or lower cognitive abilities, but maybe your questionnaire is too complex and you are not matching that? So we wanted to see if we are also increasing measurement error by simplifying our materials too. So I'll go quickly. AmeriSpeak uses address-based sampling, and during recruitment stage, we start with the mailing contact and send a sequence of mailings. That includes a postcard, an initial package, and another postcard. In these mailings, we provide a URL as well as a phone number for them to call in. Again, as I mentioned, in 2024, we also introduced PAPI before we call them and via outbound phone. And then we randomly select 1 out of 5 non-respondents, and then they receive a FedEx and in-person recruitment. So in 2024 panel recruitment, we have conducted 3x2x2 design. We also had other experiments, but I'm specifically going to focus on these equitable design experiments. So the first was simplification of contact mailings. There were 3 groups: the original design with brochure and without brochure, and the simplified design without the brochure. The second treatment group was QR, no QR. And then the third treatment group, or the third intervention, was no PAPI. We have done some experiments within the PAPI, but I'm not going to go into that to save time. So now the fun part. So the likelihood of being recruited during the initial mailing stage, when you introduce PAPI, that was the winner of the among the 3 interventions. So a recruitment mailing sequence using PAPI is 2.8 times more likely to convert a sample household member to a panelist. That was not necessarily surprising, but it took some time for these PAPIs to come back. So when we waited more and more, more and more, this likelihood increased. But the QR code also made somewhat of a difference with the odds ratio 1.1, but it wasn't statistically significant. And the new design actually did decrease the likelihood of being recruited. But this is like overall yield rate. Let's see what happens with the harder to reach, harder to retain groups. And then we specifically looked into the no brochure within the current design group so that we don't clutter the findings. We have found that no brochure was also effective, but because of the smaller sample sizes, that was also not significant, but still it increased the likelihood. And printing brochure also costs money. So if we can slightly increase the yield rate and decrease the costs, why not? So, but here is much more the interesting part here. So our new design brought in lower income, which it was interesting that it didn't bring lower education. We really thought that was going to be the case, but it did bring lower income. It did bring Hispanic. We didn't see much of a difference with Spanish speaker, but interestingly enough, it did also bring the Asian American portion of the population. And then when we look at the QR code, we have seen it did bring Spanish speaker, Hispanic, as we have hypothesized. It also brought in lower income as well as the African Americans. Lastly, the brochure didn't do as much, even though it did okay with the yield. It slightly brought in slightly higher rural folks, but it didn't make much of a difference, again, when it comes to these subpopulations. And lastly, PAPI, the star of the show, we brought more rural, more conservative, but more importantly, significantly lower income individuals. So the PAPI, we have seen quite a bit of advantage of PAPI. And lastly, data quality measures were not significantly different across treatment groups, which was great. So our findings lean towards recommendation of using these equitable strategies, though more data is needed. We have a second paper where we are looking into retention. We are also doing some interventions for our high-risk groups that I mentioned to see if we can definitely retain them, specifically when they are likely to drop off, which David also mentioned, those back out folks. And then second, with the interactive effect of those interventions, you slice and dice. So the cell sizes get so small. So we said, well, let's continue some of these experiments and let's increase our sample size and see, number one, if these effects still hold, but number two, what is the interactive effect when we if one intervention bring in one group, is the other intervention decreases that group. So lastly, we are examining with also additional contact modes in 2024-5, such as texting. With that.
Thank you.